Hello, I'm Allison, and welcome to another episode of Listen Now, Read Later, the podcast that leads you to your next favorite novel by reading you short stories. As always, we will be tying together short fiction and long-form fiction so that after you listen now, you can read later. Episode 17, Everybody Talks. Today we're bringing you two short stories that hinge on the problems caused by miscommunication. Afterward, hear Teresa explain why we have the perfect novel for you to enjoy if these stories were your cup of tea. Both of our stories today were written by Anton Chekhov, a Russian writer who lived from 1860 to 1904 and is widely regarded as one of the best short story writers ever. His work often shows both the humor and tragedy of the human experience. We'll be reading the English translations of these stories that were done by Constance Garnett, who translated 70 volumes of Russian literature into English and is credited with introducing English audiences to Anton Chekhov's work. The first story, At Christmas Time, was originally published in the St. Petersburg Gazette in 1899, and our second story, A Malefactor, was originally published in the St. Petersburg Gazette in 1885. We're reading both of these stories from the Project Gutenberg ebook edition of The Witch and Other Stories, which is a collection of Garnett's translations of 15 of Chekhov's short stories. This translated collection was originally published in 1918, and all of these stories are in the public domain. We hope you enjoy. At Christmas Time by Anton Chekhov.
What shall I write?
Said Yegor, and he dipped his pen in the ink. Vasilisa had not seen her daughter for 4 years. Her daughter Yefima had gone after her wedding to Petersburg, had sent them 2 letters, and since then seemed to vanish out of their lives. There had been no sight nor sound of her. And whether the old woman were milking her cow at dawn, or heating her stove, or dozing at night, she was always thinking of one and the same thing. What was happening to Yefima? Whether she were alive out yonder. She ought to have sent a letter. But the old father could not write, and there was no one to write. But now Christmas had come, and Vasilisa could not bear it any longer, and went to the tavern to Yegor, the brother of the innkeeper's wife, who had sat in the tavern doing nothing ever since he came back from the army. People said that he could write letters very well if he were properly paid. Vasilisa talked to the cook at the tavern, then to the mistress of the house, then to Yegor himself. They agreed upon 15 kopecks. And now, it happened on the second day of the holidays, in the tavern kitchen. Yegor was sitting at the table, holding the pen in his hand. Vasilisa was standing before him, pondering with an expression of anxiety and woe on her face. Pyotr, her husband, a very thin old man with a brownish bald patch, had come with her. He stood looking straight before him like a blind man. On the stove, a piece of pork was being braised in a saucepan. It was spurting and hissing, and seemed to actually be saying, "Flu, flu, flu." It was stifling.
What am I to write?
Yegor asked again.
What?
Asked Vasilisa, looking at him angrily and suspiciously.
Don't worry me, you are not writing for nothing. No fear, you'll be paid for it. Come write to our dear son-in-law, Andrei Hersenfinch, and to our only beloved daughter, Yefima Petrovna. With our love, we send a low bow and blessing abiding forever.
Written. Fire away.
And we wish them a happy Christmas. We are alive and well, and I wish you the same. Please, Lord, the Heavenly King.
Vasilisa pondered and exchanged glances with the old man.
And I wish you the same. Please, Lord, the Heavenly King.
She repeated, beginning to cry. She could say nothing more, and yet before, when she lay awake thinking at night, it had seemed to her that she could not get all she had to say into a dozen letters. Since the time when her daughter had gone away with her husband, much water had flowed into the sea, the old people had lived feeling bereaved, and sighed heavily at night as though they had buried their daughter. And how many events had occurred in the village since then? How many marriages and deaths? How long the winters had been? How long the nights?
It's hot.
Said Yegor, unbuttoning his waistcoat.
It must be 70 degrees. What more?
He asked. The old people were silent.
What does your son-in-law do in Petersburg?
Asked Yeager.
He was a soldier, my good friend.
The old man answered in a weak voice.
He left the service at the same time as you did. He was a soldier, and now, to be sure, he is at Petersburg at a hydropathic establishment. The doctor treats the sick with water. So he, to be sure, is house porter at the doctor's.
Here, it is written down.
Said the old woman, taking a letter out of her pocket.
We got it from Euphema. Goodness knows when. Maybe they are no longer in this world.
Yeager thought a little and began writing rapidly.
At the present time,
He wrote,
since your destiny through your own doing allotted you to the military career, we counsel you to look into the Code of Disciplinary Offenses and Fundamental Laws of the War Office, and you will see in that law the civilization of the officials of the War Office.
He wrote and kept reading aloud what was written, while Vasilisa considered what she ought to write. How great had been their want the year before, how their corn had not lasted even till Christmas, how they had to sell their cow. She ought to ask for money, ought to write that the old father was often ailing and would soon, no doubt, give up his soul to God. But how to express this in words? What must be said first, and what afterwards?
Take note.
Yeager went on writing.
In Volume 5 of the Army Regulations, soldier is a common noun and a proper one. A soldier of the first rank is called a general, and one of the last a private.
The old man stirred his lips and said softly,
It would be all right to have a look at the grandchildren.
What grandchildren?
asked the old woman, and she looked angrily at him.
Perhaps there are none.
Well, but perhaps there are. Who knows?
And thereby you can judge.
Yeager hurried on.
What is the enemy without, and what is the enemy within? The foremost of our enemies within is Bacchus.
The pen squeaked, executing upon the paper flourishes like fishhooks. Yeager hastened and read over every line several times. He sat on a stool, sprawling his broad feet under the table, well-fed, bursting with health, with a coarse animal face and a red bull neck. He was vulgarity itself, coarse, conceited, invincible, proud of having been born and bred in a pothouse. And Vasilisa quite understood the vulgarity, but could not express it in words, and could only look angrily and suspiciously at Yeager.
Her head was beginning to ache, and her thoughts were in confusion from the sound of his voice and his unintelligible words, from the heat and the stuffiness, and she said nothing and thought nothing, but simply waited for him to finish scribbling. But the old man looked with full confidence. He believed in his old woman who had brought him there, and in Yeager, and when he had mentioned the hydropathic establishment, it could be seen that he believed in the establishment and the healing efficacy of water.
Having finished the letter, Yeager got up and read the whole of it through from the beginning. The old man did not understand, but he nodded his head trustfully.
That's all right. It is smooth.
He said.
God give you good health. That's all right.
They lay on the table 3 5-kopeck pieces and went out of the tavern. The old man looked immovably straight before him as though he were blind, and perfect trustfulness was written on his face. But as Vasilisa came out of the tavern, she waved angrily at the dog and said angrily,
Ugh, the plague.
The old woman did not sleep all night. She was disturbed by thoughts, and at daybreak she got up, said her prayers, and went to the station to send off the letter. It was between 8 and 9 miles to the station. Dr. B.O. Mausweiser's hydropathic establishment worked on New Year's Day exactly as on ordinary days. The only difference was that the porter, Andre Hersenfitch, had on a uniform with new braiding, his boots had extra polish, and he greeted every visitor with,
A Happy New Year to you.
It was the morning. Andre Hersenfitch was standing at the door, reading the newspaper. Just at 10 o'clock there arrived a general, one of the habitual visitors, and directly after him the postman. Andre Hersenfitch helped the general off with his greatcoat and said,
A Happy New Year to your Excellency.
Thank you, my good fellow. The same to you.
And at the top of the stairs, the general asked, nodding towards the door. He asked the same question every day and always forgot the answer.
And what is there in that room?
The massage room, Your Excellency.
When the general's steps had died away, Andrei Hersenfich looked at the post that had come and found one addressed to himself. He tore it open, read several lines, then looking at the newspaper, he walked without haste to his own room, which was downstairs close by at the end of the passage. His wife Yefima was sitting on the bed, feeding her baby. Another child, the eldest, was standing by, laying its curly head on her knee. A third was asleep on the bed. Going into the room, Andrei gave his wife the letter and said,
From the country, I suppose.
Then he walked out again without taking his eyes from the paper. He could hear Yefima with a shaking voice reading the first lines. She read them and could read no more. These lines were enough for her. She burst into tears, and hugging her eldest child, kissing him, she began saying, and it was hard to say whether she were laughing or crying.
It's from Granny, from Grandfather,
She said,
from the country, the Heavenly Mother, saints, and martyrs. The snow lies heaped up under the roofs now. The trees are as white. The boys slide on little sledges. And dear old bald grandfather is on the stove. And there's a little yellow dog, my own darlings.
Andrei Hersenfich, hearing this, recalled that his wife had on 3 or 4 occasions given him letters and asked him to send them to the country. But some important business had always prevented him. He had not sent them, and the letters somehow got lost.
And little hares run about in the fields.
Yefima went on chanting, kissing her boy and shedding tears.
Grandfather is kind and gentle. Granny is good too, kind-hearted. They are warm-hearted in the country. They are God-fearing, and there is a little church in the village. The peasants sing in the choir. Queen of Heaven, Holy Mother and Defender, take us away from here.
Andrei Hersenfich returned to his room to smoke a little till there was another ring at the door, and Yefima ceased speaking, subsided, and wiped her eyes, though her lips were still quivering. She was very much frightened of him. Oh, how frightened of him! She trembled and was reduced to terror by the sound of his steps, by the look in his eyes, and dared not utter a word in his presence. Andrei Hersenfich lighted a cigarette, but at that very moment there was a ring from upstairs. He put out his cigarette, and assuming a very grave face, hastened to his front door. The general was coming downstairs, fresh and rosy from his bath.
And what is there in that room?
He asked, pointing to a door. Andrei Hersenfich put his hands down swiftly to the seam of his trousers and pronounced loudly,
Charcot Duché, Your Excellency.
We hope you enjoyed our first story. Now here's A Malefactor by Anton Chekhov.
An exceedingly lean little peasant in a striped hempen shirt and patched drawers stands facing the investigating magistrate, his face overgrown with hair and pitted with smallpox, and his eyes scarcely visible under thick, overhanging eyebrows, have an expression of sullen moroseness. On his head there is a perfect mop of tangled, unkempt hair, which gives him an even more spider-like air of moroseness. He is barefooted.
Denis Grigoriev.
The magistrate begins.
Come nearer and answer my questions. On the 7th of this July, the railway watchman, Ivan Semyonovich Akhanov, going along the line in the morning, found you at the 141st mile engaged in unscrewing a nut by which the rails are made fast to the sleepers. Here it is, the nut. With the aforesaid nut he detained you. Was that so?
What?
Was this all as Akhanov states?
To be sure it was.
Very good. Well, what were you unscrewing the nut for?
What?
Drop that to answer the question. What were you unscrewing the nut for?
If I hadn't wanted it, I shouldn't have unscrewed it.
Croaks Dennis, looking at the ceiling.
What did you want that nut for?
The nut? We make weights out of those nuts for our lines.
Who is we?
We people. The Klemovo peasants, that is.
Listen, my man, Don't play the idiot to me, but speak sensibly. It's no use telling lies here about weights.
I've never been a liar from a child, and now I'm telling you lies?
mutters Dennis, blinking.
But can you do without a weight, Your Honor? If you put live bait or maggots on a hook, would it go to the bottom without a weight? I'm telling lies?
Grins Dennis.
What the devil is the use of the worms if it swims to the surface? The perch and the pike and the eel pout always go to the bottom, and the bait on the surface is only taken by a shillspur. Not very often then, and there are no shillspurs in our river. That fish likes plenty of room.
Why are you telling me about shillspurs?
Well, what? Why, you ask me yourself. The gentry catch fish that weigh two in our parts. The silliest little boy would not try to catch a fish without a weight. Of course, anyone who did not understand might go to fish without a weight. There is no rule for a fool.
So you say you unscrewed this nut to make a weight for your fishing line out of it?
What else for? I wasn't playing knucklebones with.
But you might have taken lead, a bullet, a nail of some sort.
You don't pick up lead in the road. You have to buy it, and nails no good. You can't find anything better than a nut. It's heavy, and there's a hole in it.
He keeps pretending to be a fool, as though he'd been born yesterday or dropped from heaven. Don't you understand, you blockhead, what unscrewing these nuts leads to? If the watchman had not noticed it, the train might have run off the rails. People would have been killed. You would have killed people.
God forbid, Your Honor. What should I kill them for? Are we heathens or wicked people? Thank God, good gentlemen, we have lived all of our lives without ever dreaming of such a thing. Save and have mercy on us, Queen of Heaven. What are you saying?
And what do you suppose railway accidents do come from? Unscrew 2 or 3 nuts and you have an accident.
Dennis grins and screws up his eye at the magistrate incredulously.
Why, how many years have we all in the village been unscrewing nuts? And the Lord has been merciful. And you talk of accidents, killing people. If I had carried away a rail or put a log across the line, say, then maybe it would have upset the train. But, poof, a nut.
But you must understand that the nut holds the rail fast to the sleepers.
We understand that. We don't unscrew them all. We leave some. We don't do it thoughtlessly. We understand.
Dennis yawns and makes the sign of the cross over his mouth.
Last year the train went off the rails here,
says the magistrate.
Now I see why.
What do you say, Your Honor?
I am telling you now that I see why the train went off the rails last year. I understand.
That's what you educated people for, to understand, you kind gentlemen. The Lord knows to whom to give understanding. Here you have reasoned how and what, but the watchman, a peasant like ourselves, with no understanding at all, catches one by the collar and hauls one along. You should reason first and then haul me off. It's a saying that a peasant has a peasant's wit. Write down, too, Your Honor, that he hit me twice, in the jaw and in the chest.
When your hut was searched, they found another nut. At what spot did you unscrew that, and when?
You mean the nut which lay under the red box?
I don't know where it was lying, only it was found. When did you unscrew it?
I didn't unscrew it. Ignashka, the son of one-eyed Semyon, gave it to me. I mean the one which was under the box, but the one which was in the sledge in the yard, Mitrofan and I unscrewed together.
What Mitrofan?
Mitrofan Petrov. Haven't you heard of him? He makes nets in our village and sells them to the gentry. He needs a lot of those nuts, reckon a matter of 10 each net.
Listen, Article 1081 of the Penal Code lays down that every wilful damage of the railway line committed when it can expose the traffic on the line to danger, and the guilty party knows that an accident must be caused by it. Do you understand? Knows, and you could not help knowing what this unscrewing would lead to, is liable to penal servitude.
Of course you know best. We are ignorant people. What do we understand?
You understand all about it. You are lying, shamming.
What should I lie for? Ask in the village if you don't believe me. Only a bleak is caught without a weight. There is no fish worse than a gudgeon, yet even that won't bite without a weight.
You'd better tell me about the shillspur next,
said the magistrate, smiling.
There are no shillspurs in our part. We cast our line without a weight on the top of the water with a butterfly. A mullet may be caught that way, though that is not often.
Come, hold your tongue.
A silence follows. Dennis shifts from one foot to the other, looks at the table with the green cloth on it, and blinks his eyes violently, as though what was before him was not the cloth, but the sun. The magistrate writes rapidly.
Can I go?
Asks Dennis after a long silence.
No, I must take you under guard and send you to prison.
Dennis leaves off blinking and, raising his thick eyebrows, looks inquiringly at the magistrate.
How do you mean to prison, Your Honor? I have no time to spare. I must go to the fair. I must get 3 rubles from Yegor for some tallow.
Hold your tongue. Don't interrupt.
To prison? If there was something to go for, I'd go. But just to go for nothing? What for? I haven't stolen anything, I believe, and I've not been fighting. If you're in doubt about the arrears, Your Honor, don't believe the elder. You ask the agent. He's a regular heathen, the elder, you know.
Hold your tongue.
I'm holding my tongue as it is.
Mutters Dennis.
But that the elder has lied over the account, I'll take my oath for it. There are 3 of us brothers, Kuzma Grigoryev, then Yegor Grigoryev, and me, Dennis Grigoryev.
You are hindering me. Hey, Semyon,
Cries the magistrate.
take him away.
There are 3 of us brothers.
Mutters Dennis, as 2 stalwart soldiers take him and lead him out of the room.
A brother is not responsible for a brother. Kuzma does not pay, so you, Dennis, must answer for it. Judges indeed. Our master, the general, is dead. The kingdom of heaven be his. Or he would have shown you judges. You ought to judge sensibly, not at random. Flog if you like, but flog someone who deserves it. Flog with conscience.
Now that you've listened, here's what to read later. Misunderstandings. Miscommunications. In real life, they create the most annoying problems that could have easily been avoided. In fiction, they create the most delicious conflicts for characters to endure. In this episode's Chekhov stories, we see classic examples of how misunderstandings create intriguing mysteries and unforgettable reveals. It's a trope as old as time, and it keeps showing up in literature for a reason. So if you've ever misread a situation, if you enjoy a flair for dramatic irony, if you love to mentally chide characters for clearly making the wrong decision, and if you love to get absorbed into someone else's miscommunication drama, then you have to read The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. An abandoned breakfast, an empty seat at candlelit lunch, an engagement party missing a +1. Siobhan, Miranda, and Jane are very different girls, but they've all been stood up. Not only that, but their no-show date is the same man, and on Valentine's Day, no less. Somehow, all 3 find themselves forgiving him, though. But the question lingers. Where was he on Valentine's Day? Rom-coms are the home of many a misunderstanding, and The No-Show is no different. Find yourself falling for the male lead despite your better judgment. But even more, find yourself falling for these 3 so different yet so lovable main characters. Their secrets unfold in such a compelling and heartfelt way that makes the book impossible to put down. This is a rom-com with so much heart, and the healthiest dash of dramatic misunderstanding. So if you enjoyed At Christmas Time and The Malefactors, then you have to read The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. Thanks for listening to this episode of Listen Now, Read Later. Follow us on Instagram for fun extras and updates on our next episode. Want to support local booksellers and this podcast? Buy The No-Show and any other books you like through our bookshop.org affiliate store. Now it's time for you to go read the book, and we'll catch you when you listen later.